Live from beyond the Beltway, this is Bruce DuMont with our weekly analysis of national politics, with occasional injections of rumor and innuendo, all offered up by our panel of political insiders, pundits, power brokers, public servants, and most importantly, plain-speaking Americans from coast to coast. Tonight featuring commentary by conservative Republican Jeannie Ives, liberal Democrat Christine Schombacher, also David Maciotra, liberal writer, Brian Lambeck, libertarian, and Republican John Zahm. Our program tonight coming to you from our own base at WCGO in beautiful Evanston, Illinois. It's nice to have you with us this evening. I've had an opportunity to spend much of this Independence Day weekend in Galena, Illinois, which is in the western part of the United States, and also in Illinois, and went over into Dubuque, Iowa as well. Also just a beautiful city. If you've never been to either of those locations, I highly recommend it. It is probably the most beautiful part of Illinois, and a great spot along the Mississippi River in Dubuque, Iowa. We've got lots to talk about this evening. Our liberal Democrat is Christine Schombacher. Also, our Republican is Jeannie Ives. And I want to begin by talking about what I heard today. Normally on a Sunday, I get a chance to watch all of the Sunday morning talk shows, talking heads. This week, because I was on vacation, I only watched a little bit of Meet the Press, and Andrea Mitchell was sitting in for Chuck Todd. And she was going on and on and on about the speech that Donald Trump gave at the 4th of July at Mount Rushmore. And because I was on vacation, I did not see it. But she was going on, her guests were going on, everybody was wringing their hands. They just couldn't believe. So this afternoon, I said, well, I've got to take a look at this before we go on the air this evening. So I watched it on YouTube, and my reaction was, why was everybody so upset about what was said? I want to start with you, Jeannie, because you've seen the speech. What was your reaction to the speech, and why are so many liberal and media types so upset about it?
Look, he did a great job. And by the way, I grew up in South Dakota.
Oh.
So Rushmore was extremely important. It still is extremely important to our state. It's a beautiful part of the country. East River and West River are vastly different from each other. And tourism is the second most profitable business to our state, that being primarily Mount Rushmore. So it is it's always been a place of pride for South Dakotans.
What'd you think of the speech?
Remarkable that he was there.
What did you think of the speech?
I thought it was outstanding. I thought he spoke to what is happening on the ground that people see and upsets real Americans, real patriots. And this idea of the cancel culture must be canceled. Him taking it on resonates with normal Americans who see what's going on, and all they want is stability. And all they want to do is feel proud about America and not all this bashing that you have seen going on. It's a very small subset of Americans who are taking to the streets and protesting and blocking people's ordinary lives,
all right,
actually destroying people's lives.
I want to get Christine Schombacher in here. Christine she's a liberal Democrat. She ran for Congress.
I'm going to have to completely disagree. I think
you did not see the speech. By the way, we should mention that you said you did not see the speech, but you read about it. And are you as exercised as some of the people in the media are?
Yeah, so I read sections of his 40-minute speech, and I think it was completely tone deaf. He is continuing to divide when the majority of Americans do support the protests. They want systematic reform. They want criminal justice reform. They want good schools throughout the entire country, no matter where you live. In fact, there's polls that come out that most Republicans support the protests. So I think
Christine, let me just interject here.
Oh, no.
He did not mention the protesters. You immediately went to the
rioters and the
he talked about those
left and angry mob.
Yes, he did. Now let me ask you this question: do you see a difference between protesting about what happened to George Floyd and what happened by those who are opposed to the president, how they acted? Do you see a difference between legal protest and burning and rioting and tearing down statues?
I definitely see a difference between exercising your First Amendment rights and then committing criminal activity if you're doing arson. There's definitely clear lines. I think most people would agree with that.
Yeah.
That is not the majority of people that took the streets, though. That's just a talking point to try to undercut a movement.
Christine, I did not say that, and I don't agree. And I wouldn't say that. I'm just saying is that what the president was talking about, he was talking about those that have chosen to tear down monuments. He did not talk about protesting. He talked about rioting. He didn't even mention looting. So he was able to differentiate between those maybe in a majoritarian position, and then there are those that really took advantage of the situation. He drew the line, and he does want people to unite against that part of the group.
But he also is not talking about uniting for systematic reform. It's his omission speaks volume and what he's concentrating on. He's trying to create some sort of horrific divide.
Jeannie
Ives cannot let that pass. He's already signed executive orders that deal with reform. Senator Tim Scott has put forth a very comprehensive policing reform act as well that the Democrats have completely blocked.
Because they have no teeth.
Last week in the Congress, excuse me, I'm speaking. I let you speak. Last week in Congress, the Democrats in the House refused to condemn the defund the police movement and procedural vote. So they obviously think that we should, as a whole, holistically as a party, defund the police. The president's speech spoke to the cancel culture, spoke to the idea that we're going to tear down George Washington's statue, that Lincoln should be attacked as well, that even Teddy Roosevelt is not worthy of admiration. I mean, this is the type of stuff that is absolutely infuriates Americans who know that these men have done great things for all of humanity. And that's what he spoke to. In fact, he said before these figures were immortalized in stone, they were great American giants in full flesh and blood, gallant men whose intrepid deeds unleashed the greatest leap of human advancement in the world has ever known.
Christine, go ahead, Christine.
Right. Yeah, I think just responding to that, so you actually have to look at what the statues are. So there's a statue of Abraham Lincoln with a black man clearly inferior to him that he would even probably object to this day. We can make a monument to Abraham Lincoln, which we have done. It's in DC. That is also, it doesn't put a black man clearly underneath him as a human. That's wrong. And it does need to come down. And also, where are our statues of Frederick Douglass? Why isn't he on currency? Why aren't we celebrating?
Who says it has to come down?
One at a time. Go ahead, Christine, finish your point.
We need to celebrate people who have truly made this country great without also ostracizing and making things painful and horrific.
When the president said near the end of his speech that he wants to create this garden of heroes in which many of the people who we mentioned in the speech would be recognized. He didn't say specifically name by name, but he ticked off many people that I don't think there'd be any controversy at all. He wants to build this garden of heroes. So he's signaling on, and when we come back, I want to talk more about it. We do have to break. We do have to break. I'm Bruce DuMont, back shortly from Evanston, Illinois.
There are everyday actions to help prevent the spread of respiratory diseases. Wash your hands. Avoid close contact with people who are sick. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. Stay home when you are sick. Cover your cough or sneeze. Clean and disinfect frequently touched objects with household cleaning spray. For more information, visit cdc.gov/COVID-19. This message brought to you by the National Association of Broadcasters and this station.
A line is a powerful thing. It connects the global economy to your living room. Cleaner air to stronger markets. Factory floors to less crowded roads. Today's progress to tomorrow's promise. Norfolk Southern. One line, infinite possibilities.
Bruce DuMont continuing on Independence Weekend from Evanston, Illinois, and we're talking about the president's speech at Mount Rushmore. We have difference of opinion, at least those that are also sending us notes via YouTube and by Facebook. And a question that I would have, we'll go to calls in just a moment, but I want to go back to something that you said, Christine, and that is that the president wasn't unifying the country. I mean, we're in a presidential campaign. When you ran against Danny Davis for Congress earlier this year, you were drawing differences between you and Danny Davis. Isn't a campaign not about bringing people together? It's about talking about the differences between one party and the other, and by nature, that deals with conflict.
Fundamentally reject that. I think you can have differences between your opponent and then still try to bring the community together. And that's what I try to do with my campaign, is bring the community together, try to make the 7th congressional district better. And I would
do you agree in a campaign? I want to get over in a campaign. There isn't necessarily unity. And people who agree with you on one point, that doesn't mean that your position is something that needs to be unified, because there are people who disagree with you. We live in a country where we're about 50-50. So how can you unify a country when 50% of the people won't even listen to the other side? I want to hear your response, then I want to hear Jeannie's response. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm from Nebraska. A lot of my family members are Republican. A lot of my friends are Republican. And we have way more common ground, and we're all humans, and we need to get back to that. We need to get back to where you can have common ground, you can have respectful discourse, and you can try to make people and inspire people to be better and lead with hope, and rather than leading with divide and hate, which is what President Trump continuously does.
Jeannie Ives. Does he lead with hatred?
That's a pretty interesting perspective, because really what we all should be united behind are the core principles that make us American, especially when he's doing a July 4th speech about our founding principles, which is exactly how he started, talking about the incredible foresight that our founding fathers had to create in a document, something where we are once and for all, not ruled by the mob, not ruled by the majority, not ruled by an individual king, but rather ruled by a document that we all can agree on, where everybody has their own individual rights. And that's how Trump started his speech, harkening back to our founding. That is the uniting thing. It would be remiss of him to not at the same time point out the absolute lawlessness that has gone on for now months. And in the wake of the George Floyd murder, which we all agree was horrific and tragic, and for which those men will more than likely spend the rest of their lives in jail. Now, for him to not point out that the cancel culture needs to be canceled, and it does. I have specific friends who have been impacted by this idea that if you're not bending a knee to BLM, then you should lose your job. That is a problem. The fact that you think that mobs of people can infringe on people's personal property and not be prosecuted is a problem. We are a nation made, individually responsible for our own actions and held accountable by the same rule of law. That is the uniting factor in this case.
Christine.
Yeah, so I'd like to point out that it's also not just my opinion. His numbers are plummeting. He's losing his base from his own base over his rhetoric, his tone-deaf rhetoric. And he could simply acknowledge that, yes, our founding fathers had amazing
Christine, why do you worry about Donald Trump losing his base? I would think you'd be throwing a party about that. Why are so many Democrats and people in the media worried about it?
This is a majority opinion, and that what he should have done is said, our founding fathers had great principles, but we didn't live up to it. So women were not considered people, they were property. People of color were not considered people, they were property.
The president, by the way, the president referenced the president in the speech, Christine, in the president's speech, he talked about from the Declaration of Independence that it was a promissory note. He referenced Dr. Martin Luther King as a promissory note. I think Jeannie and I certainly would agree. I think there's a lot of things that are still promissory notes. And African Americans, I think they do have to have things reviewed as to how they've been treated and how they've been shut out for much of America's history. And certainly, I think the one thing that bothers me the most is that in the wake of the George Floyd case situation up in Minnesota, where I think probably 95% of the American people were united. They were all on the same side. They thought the cop did a bad job. And from that, the initial protests in the street about that, they were hijacked, some by Antifa, some by people who hated America, some people who decided, no, you know what we're going to do? We're going to start tearing down Confederate statues. That has nothing to do with improving police brutality in 2020. Nothing. And what happens is the violence and the looting and the arsonists that followed, the pictures told the story. Those folks, they completely commandeered the movement, which was about George Floyd. You hardly even hear about George Floyd anymore, unfortunately.
And Bruce, on that note, let's face it. Every one of the major cities that were looted and robbed were run by Democrats and have been so for decades. Look, I went down to the south side of Chicago to visit with Pastor Corey Brooks. His neighborhood of Inglewood, majority minority by far, was looted and busted into. They lost many of their drugstores, their grocery stores, their Walmarts, their Target. Walmart had to be basically convinced to come back in and set up shop after the mayor of Chicago had to cajole them to do so, because nobody wants that to happen. These people destroyed Black neighborhoods and Black businesses. How is that fair? And the Democrats have a lot to answer to when it comes to all the missed opportunities to actually help those minorities.
Christine responds to that, because you were trying to represent a district that had been underserved.
Yeah. So one, I'm going to say that people are just sick of it. And George Floyd, it started out with a horrific execution that was then had a bullshit charge. He had a third-degree murder charge. I don't know if either of you have read the statute. I have. And it should have been a first-degree charge. It is wrongful that a first-degree charge was not brought so that a jury of peers could determine whether it was first-degree or second-degree. That's ridiculous.
And I'm not. Just a moment. Christine, 1 second. Christine, please. Listen, Christine. You had Democrats making those decisions
improperly, and you have a problem with that. You apparently have a problem with your party not being able to charge correctly. But we understand what happens when you charge first-degree murder and you can't get it. The guy gets off.
That's not, I don't know if you're an attorney, but that's not how it works. So you can have the
charge, but the Democrats, if you're contesting, but they
more considerate so that I can speak. So that's not how the law works. I'm not sure if you're an attorney, but you would bring a first-degree charge. You would also have a second-degree charge. So if they don't find
Christine, may I ask you at this moment in time, when the Democrat state's attorney in that county looked at all the evidence and he made the call, and the Attorney General of the state of Minnesota, why are you wasting time talking about an issue that's already been resolved by a Democrat Attorney General in the state? Why are you wasting that time? Aren't there more important things to talk about? Whether or not, well, it's no, but I'm talking about how is that germane to the issues that we're talking about? How does whether or not he would? How does Christine answer my question? How does it, Christine? You've got to wear a headset because you're not playing fair on this program tonight. You are not playing fair. You're talking and not listening to a thing that anybody says. I will give you plenty of opportunity to talk, but you sometimes you got to shut your mouth and open your ears. And all I'm saying is the issues that you talk about, I absolutely agree that police brutality is a problem. I don't think there's one, bad apple. I think there are many bad apples who wear badges, okay? That's where I'm coming from. But for you to spend time talking about how a Democrat attorney general is prosecuting, whether it was first degree or second degree, what does that do with someone who's going to be arrested tonight on the west side of Chicago? What is it?
So Bruce, you were saying how it started off peaceful and you didn't understand. So I was actually trying to answer your question, and I would appreciate if you would also listen to me. And I was explaining that people were very upset over the charge because it was a BS charge.
Why?
And they want real justice.
But why is that important if the issue is you want to root out, you want to have punishment to the police officers in that case. You want them to be punished. They are going to be punished. They were charged within 1 week of the crime. 1 week. Can you have speedier justice than that? Do you want them already to be sent to the electric chair? All right, I want to switch to some other guests. We're going to go to Dave. We're going to go to Dave. I want to go to Dave now. I want to bring the callers in. Let's go to Dave, listening to us in Spokane, Washington. Go ahead. You're on the air.
Hey, good evening. Just a couple of comments. One was referring to at the founding of America that women were property, and how this narrative that America was so terrible when we were founded, and that some people say we're still so terrible. Well, if the panelists would like to answer the question as to what do they think about all the other countries around the entire world that were equally and many times far, far worse than anything you saw going on in America. If you think about the Roman Colosseum, I mean, even if you think of what a lot of people like to talk about, royal weddings nowadays, anytime there's a royal wedding, half of the country in the world gets all mesmerized with this wedding. Well, if you go back in time, kings and queens, you have funny shows on PBS now about Poldark, making it seem kind of nice and everybody's happy.
Dave, I got to stop you there. I appreciate your call, but we're running into a commercial break. Thanks very much for calling from Spokane. We'll take more calls when we come back. I'm Bruce DuMont. Happy Independence Day.
Here's how you can make your own face covering in a few easy steps with items you can find around the house, like an old scarf, a bandana or a hand towel, or you can make a face covering out of an old t-shirt. Fold it to the middle from the bottom, fold it to the middle from the top, fold it again to the middle from the bottom, and again from the top, and then 2 rubber bands, one on one side and one on the other side. Then you fold either side to the middle, and you have yourself cloth face covering. It's that easy.
Flintstones, meet the Flintstones, they're the modern Sonic family. From the town of Beltway, meet George Jetson. His boy Elroy.
With instant acceleration, electric cars are more fun to drive and more affordable than ever. Electric cars are here. Plug in to the present.
Bruce DuMont back. Thanks very much for joining us tonight. We're going to let each of our guests now introduce themselves, and we'll begin with Christine Schombacher. Christine?
I'm Christine. I'm a Democrat.
What else do you do? What do you do for a living?
Yeah, I'm an attorney. I do commercial litigation at Denton's, a law firm here in Chicago.
Why are you a Democrat?
Why am I a Democrat? Well, I believe in the core democratic principles. I believe in women's rights. I believe in rights for people of all sexual orientations. I am a strong believer in the First Amendment, and I fundamentally resound with all of the democratic core principles, and that's why I identify as a Democrat.
Okay, one last question to you is, at the moment, Joe Biden is about to make a choice for vice president, a running mate. Who would be your recommendation for Joe Biden?
Tammy Duckworth.
Tammy Duckworth.
Hands down, Tammy Duckworth.
All right, let's go to Jeannie Ives. Jean, a lot of people know you from being on this program, but for those that don't, a little more background on your information and the campaign you're running.
Thank you very much, Bruce. Thanks for having me on your program for, I think, about 7 years now. I really appreciate the opportunity to discuss really important issues with you from coast to coast. And congratulations on your 40th year anniversary last weekend. Yes, I'm a mother of 5. I'm a West Point graduate, served 6 years in the Army, and I'm currently running for Congress in the Illinois 6th Congressional District. And I served in the state legislature for 6 years as well, and on my local city council.
A question to you. You ran in a primary against Governor Rauner, and you came very, very close. You are now in a general election. You survived a primary recently, and you are now the Republican candidate. And one of the questions that pundits ask is whether or not Donald Trump is as unified in the support of the Republicans now that polls suggested he was several months ago. So my question to you, because you're going out to talk to Republicans who really love the president, and I'm sure that you run into some Republicans that aren't necessarily a huge fan of the president's, where would you put his personal popularity in the district that you hope to represent?
Donald Trump did not win this district back in 2016, and he was certainly a drag in 2018. I think he provided a lot of energy for Democrats to come out and vote against our local congressman, who was doing a superb job, in my opinion. And that was a vote really against Donald Trump. So he doesn't play that well. That said, if people know me, they know my record. I'm the one who took on our billion-dollar governor of my own party over policy differences. So I don't play follow the leader very well. I look at policy, and I've worked with Democrats when I served in the super minority and the minority to pass really good far-reaching legislation to help all of my constituents, and in fact, all Illinoisans. So I'm going to take that same record up to Congress. But that said, yeah, he's, it's a mixed bag. Some people love what he's doing and love him personally. A lot of people are very uncomfortable with his rhetoric. But when you get drilled down into what do you not like about his policy prescriptions, most people have to agree that they love the thriving economy. They like the fact that he was holding our allies accountable for their share of national defense. They like that he's willing to hold China accountable, which is really our country's greatest threat.
Would he help you if he came in to campaign in your congressional district for you? Would that help you in your view?
I think it'd probably be a neutral effect, honestly. Neither help nor hurt.
Okay. Let's go to calls. Let's go back to Bonnie from Crown Point, Indiana. Go ahead, Bonnie. Hello, Bonnie. Are you there? Line 3. Are you on line 3, Bonnie?
Bruce, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Bruce, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Hello?
Yes, I can hear you, Bonnie.
Yeah, you can hear me?
I can.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. Christine, and I got 2 things to say to Christine.
She's here.
First of all, she is woefully unprepared for this. She didn't even listen to the Trump speech in its entirety for context. I mean, why wouldn't she assume that this wouldn't be a topic of tonight's show? So that's my first issue. My second issue with her is, how dare you, Christine, criticize the statue of the black man in Lincoln? That was, because you don't know, that was commissioned by former slaves. They sent in their pennies, nickels, and dimes to create that statue. And the black man in the statue was holding his head up. His chains were in his hands, showing him not as being passive, but helping to break those chains. And so, you need to stop listening to CNN in a 30-second soundbite. You need to educate yourself if you're going to come on this show, because the people who listen to this show are well informed. And you're going to look foolish if you don't know what you're talking about.
Let's let Christine respond to your castigation.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to agree on this point. I think looking at the statue in its totality, it does not show a black man equal to a white man. It shows
he wasn't at the time. He wasn't at the time of the.
That?
But he wasn't at the time of the creation of that statue.
I'm going to say
one was the president. One was the president of the United States. What people take
away from that image, it's not showing equality.
What was the president of the United States?
It's not showing equality. 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 It's not showing e
Can I say one thing? I really think, going to West Point, it was a very historical environment. We have statues all around that campus. Are they going to come in and tear down the huge George Washington statue in front of Washington Hall? Are we going to rename Lee Barracks, where General Lee was the superintendent there? Or are we going to understand our history in context and at that time, and perhaps with a little bit more explanation, get a fuller meaning in our lives about what was happening in that period and why certain things were erected? Now, I think it's terrific that Mississippi decided to redo their state flag, and they did that in a reasonable way. They did that by a vote of elected officials. They didn't just go ahead and torch buildings over it. They did it in a respectful way, and they came to the right conclusion. I think with the statuaries, much of it should maybe be put on display and explained, and much of it just needs further explanation in place. And I think that's where we need to go as a country, because if we don't understand our history, we won't understand how far we've come and how much further we need to go.
Jeannie, I would agree with you that I think local municipalities can make decisions on the statues that are in their respective municipalities. But one decision that is clearly a federal decision is the decision made by the military, by the Defense Department, on the naming of military bases. Many of those military bases, I think it's about 14 of them, were named after generals on the Confederate side in the war, which was a traitorous act. Do you, because as being a graduate of West Point, do you think that there should be a renaming of those 12 to 14 military bases that are named for military and Confederate traitors?
Look, I have no problem if we have a learned discussion about renaming some of them. I have no problem about that. But, when I went to Fort Benning and jumped out of airplanes, I didn't look up who Mr. Benning was. Right. Had no idea. Fort Bragg soldiers, how many of those soldiers understood that he was Confederate general? Probably very few of them understand that. And as with most things, part of the naming of the bases had to do with money and support to get those things funded. So that's so typical.
Do you think those names? Do you think those names should?
We certainly have modern generals for which many of these places could possibly be renamed.
Yes, that's what General Petraeus has said. That there's enough military active generals. You don't have to pick 12 to 14 from the Confederacy. Christine, I think I know your answer, but what's your answer to that same question? Should those names be removed?
I do think that they should be renamed, and I would like to point out that there's Republican support for that. For example, Don Bacon is also a veteran and wants to rename, because other countries don't do this. It doesn't make sense. But you're not going to find.
But why would? But I guess my question would be, you just said in response a direct question to you, who would like to represent a certain district of Illinois in Congress. I asked you for your opinion, and you immediately went and said that there were some Republicans that would would like to keep the name as is.
No, I did not say that. I was saying that there are Republicans that support renaming them. For example, my point was there's overwhelming support.
Yes, you're right. Okay. These. And again, since we're if we're going to discuss the politics of it, every one of those bases or forts, every single one of them was named and with the support of a Democratic leader in the U.S. Senate, primarily from the state of Georgia. And every single one of them was named during the administration of Franklin Delano Roosevelt or Woodrow Wilson. There was no Republican president that was in office, and basically it was when Democrats controlled both houses of Congress when those things happened. So again, mistakes were made, and they were made for political reasons, because at that time the chairman of the House and Senate Armed Services Committee were always Democrats, always, for 20, 30 years. We do have to pause. We have more callers on the line. 1-800-723-8229 from coast to coast and border to border on Independence Day 2020. I'm Bruce DuMont, coming to you live, coast to coast, border to border and around the world at beyondthebeltway.com.
Dallas, St. Louis, Nashville, Tuscaloosa. All major cities to feel the destruction caused by a direct hit from a tornado. Is Chicago next? It's not a question of if, but when, and the clock is ticking. Learn what to do now at ready.illinois.gov to become tornado ready.
Bruce DuMont back. Nice to have you with us. Here's a comment from Mac Birch, who's a regular listener. He says, Bruce, Democrats were different in the 1950s. It is disingenuous for you to bring this up, as you know better. Well, again, both parties were different in the 1950s and 1960s. And all I'm just saying is that one of the things I'm always interested in, since doing this program. There are so many problems that this country faces, and it's easy to talk about the problems. I'm very interested in what political parties do when they have the power. When they have the power to do and change things, what do they do with their power? And in this particular case, the Democrats in the 1950s, and go back to the 40s, when there was the Solid South and it was Democrats, the most powerful people, Richard Russell, Herman Talmadge of Georgia, just to name a few, Mendel Rivers in the House in South Carolina. They were Democratic powerhouses. That's why everybody was voting Democratic then. And again, it was Republicans then that were standing up, certainly in 1960, 1964, they were standing up and they were voting for the Civil Rights Bill. The Civil Rights Bill would not have passed without a lot of Republicans, including Everett McKinley Dirksen, the Senate minority leader. He was the one that got the thing passed. So again, parties do change. But again, since we have a lot of discussions where people don't have a reference of history, I like to put that up whenever we can. Let's go to Joy from Spokane, Washington. She's listening. She not a big fan of the Trump speech. Go ahead, Joy. Why not?
Well, I listened to both of his speeches, both the Mount Rushmore and the one in Washington, D.C.
Uh-huh.
And I am a Democrat, came from a family of Democrats, and I did not hear him, and I'll admit maybe I have some bias listening, but I did not hear him make any distinction between protesters and rioters. I felt his comments were directed to anyone who was on the street, and I did march in Spokane. The part I was in was very peaceful. There was some trouble the first march, but they had subsequent marches. There have not been problems.
Mm-hmm.
And so I felt that his comments were very targeted against anyone who may have had support for the Black Lives Matter. He had already called it a hate movement. And I wrote a comment on Facebook that I felt like this was the most or the least united I've ever felt on the 4th of July for my country. And I'm 64 years old. I grew up on an Air Force base. We actually were stationed in Rapid City. So I saw Mount Rushmore in person, a number of times. And this president has just been disrespectful. I think there is this element of evil in him. I truly do.
Okay. Joy, let me ask a question. As a self-identified Democrat, and I want to ask this question to Christine as well, but I'll let Joy tackle it first. Do you believe that Democratic leadership, you can define it however you want, whether it's Joe Biden or members of the House, the Senate, Chuck Schumer, name, do you think they have been articulate and clear and loud in denouncing the violence, the looting, and the arson that has come out of some of the violent protests? Have they been clear in saying that should not happen, or separating it from the protesters?
I think so. I mean, and I think, I didn't agree how long Seattle went, but once there was violence, for example, both Jay Inslee and the mayor said, no, this is now an unlawful,
after 10 days,
whatever they taking it over.
Yeah, but they waited 10 days to do it.
And I think, but they weren't seeing the violence up to that point. And again, I said I disagree with how long it went.
Yeah.
But I feel as if they did make a statement that we're not putting up with this violence. I know in Spokane, they were making arrests. I think in these other cities, arrests were being made. I think for me, just personally, where this hits for me is that it's gone beyond George Floyd, and it's gone to a point of recognizing that racism is an issue, and it's an important issue. We're doing a adult study with my church starting next week, and it's a predominantly white church. But we're going to do that. I've talked to enough people, young people. This young person yesterday who's dog sitting for me and house sitting. She just graduated from Whitworth University, which is a very good college. She's going to be a teacher. She's had people come up to her and say, wow, you're really smart for a brown person. I had physical therapy last week. The young woman there who's biracial, she was told the older man who walked in that he needed to put on a mask. He said, the only mask I'm going to wear is one with a swastika on it.
Oh, well. Well, those by the way, let me just. I want to give Christine an opportunity to respond to the same question, whether or not Democrats have been strong and clear in denouncing the violence that has taken place. Christine.
I think particularly the mayor of Chicago has done a great job, and there were a lot of arrests made here as well. A lot of arrests made when people were committing crimes. But again, I want to emphasize that the super majority of people were rightfully exercising their constitutional right to protest against the police brutality, the horrific and over-incarceration of Black men, and we need fundamental change. And I'd like to point out that Breonna Taylor's murderers are still free.
Okay. On that note, we are out of time. Christine Schombacher, she has been our Democrat, joining us in hour number 1. Christine, thank you very much. Jeannie Ives, you have been our Republican. Thank you very much for being with us as well. And again, we're coming up with another full hour of discussion. And in the next hour, we're going to be joined by David Massiotra. He's our liberal. Our conservative is John Zalm. And our libertarian is Brian Lambrecht. They'll all be here in the next hour. I'm Bruce DuMont. Don't go away. Full hour to come.
Welcome to the world, 2116. You can fly across town in minutes, or across the globe in under an hour. Whole communities are living on Mars. And solar satellites provide Earth with unlimited clean power. In less than a century, Boeing took the world from seaplanes to space planes, across the universe and beyond. And if you thought that was amazing, you just wait.
Today, fresh fruits and vegetables will go from a field in California to a grocer in Miami. A bottle of beer from Eagle Pass will journey to a restaurant in Manhattan. A 2x4 in Oregon will find its way to a townhome in Denver. A hybrid will say goodbye to Detroit and hello to a showroom in Austin. While a steel beam will leave a mill in Illinois for a high-rise in Phoenix. And a flat screen in China will head to an electronics store in Memphis. Because today, as every day, wherever you find business, you'll find us.